Commander Tobler believed he had seen it all, but today he had encountered a Deathworld. Not just any Deathworld, but the Deathworld. It hadn't been long since Commander Tobler was given command of the HFY Breaking Dawn. Even so, he and his crew had adjusted to its amenities with ease, as if they had spent years aboard this vessel, despite it having finished construction barely 3 months prior. That was in UI. Standard years and months, of course, as measured by the cosmological cycles of the Galactic Union's capital world. The Breaking Dawn was state-of-the-art, equipped with a new type of FTL drive that folded the fabric of space-time itself, creating a sort of shock wave that propelled the ship faster than any vessel could hope to travel by conventional means. Even hyperspace lanes paled in comparison. The crew had taken to calling the F-Core a bang in a bottle, a reference to the theorized origins of the universe. More important than its sheer speed, however, was the fact that it was entirely different from conventional means. It used to take decades, even centuries, to get a drone out to a new system and build a jump gate, but the Fold core was a self-contained FTL drive, meaning it could go just about anywhere with no jump gate needed. Commander Tobler was still a bit sore that he hadn't won the competition. He could be out in deep space right now, traveling to entirely different galaxies. Instead, he was given the only slightly less enviable task of exploring the Kepler Void. The Kepler Void, of course, was the mysterious region of the galaxy where jump gate tunnels simply didn't work, and most shields weren't strong enough to survive the radiation bombardment of the unstable stars, especially not those of long-distance gate drones, which had to reserve years' worth of power to complete their mission. The scientific reasons behind it were ill understood, and it didn't help that anyone who seemed to know a thing or two about it constantly ended up arguing over esoteric terminology. Tobler had absolutely no idea what a quark was, let alone how reverberations and gravitational waves could cause it to become so unstable that even the more advanced tunneler gates couldn't transmit through it. Those quantum tunnel devices were known for their stability, and they just couldn't penetrate the stuff. For a while it was debated if it was even possible for planets to exist in the void, but a century ago new forms of long-distance photon scans developed specifically for looking into the void confirmed the orbital shadows of worlds among the void stars. Finally, a use for macro telescopes was found. Regardless, the first ship ever to traverse the void and live to tell about it was the HFY Breaking Dawn, commanded by Tobler Jet Rosowski I and his crew. All of them were veterans of the Pollinate genocides, complemented by the standard complement of government personnel. "Egads, I've got to say," Tobler complained. "This sure is boring," what exclaimed Dr. Bauskyle, "how could you say that? The amount of data we've been able to gather is... I don't care about your numbers and charts." Tobler interrupted. "I'm here to learn if there's life in this damnable void, and so far all we've found are lifeless rocks and gas giants, just like most everywhere else in the galaxy. So far. The only special thing about this stupid void is that I can't call my wife right now. None of us can. I haven't seen my daughter's face in 3 weeks," Tobler argued as he turned away from the scientist to vent at the blank view screen. "Yeah," chimed in Corporal Yorn. "I can barely sleep not knowing if either of my husbands are eating correctly." "They're slobs, they wouldn't know a vitamin if I threw a supplement at them." "God, Yorn, do you really have to rub your love life in our faces?" Corporal Myers whined. "I get it's a cultural thing, but damn, I wish I were so lucky. All I've got is an ex and 2 kids that hate my guts. I should be out there hitting the clubs right now, not doing this damn callback work. I earned my retirement on Esther 8. I deserve at least a vacation." Myers added, almost pathetically. If the gazes of the other bridge crew were anything to go by, it was clear they shared the sentiment. "Let's calm down, everybody. We're all stressed. We're all on the same ship here. This assignment is going to be a couple of years at least. Just be thankful the ship is so fast. We've been ordered to give reports every month. Just 1 week to go, it won't be long." Counselor Namble said, attempting to restore calm. He was always good at helping the crew stay level-headed, but even he was having trouble with this assignment. Despite this, he still avoided the temptation to join in the venting respectable. "All stop," Commander Tobler cried. The ship lurched to a halt, though that was an artificial effect designed to inform the crew of such a sudden stoppage. Instincts were hard to beat, so it was common for spaceborne vessels to instead co-opt them when convenient. A lurch like this was an easy way to convey exactly what had happened to everyone on the ship without a single word. Most everything was secured just in case actual combat happened, so there was no risk of anything getting knocked over. Commander Tobler appeared to be listening intently to something, a message from some other compartment of the ship. Despite being relatively new, the ship was massive, one of the largest science vessels ever constructed. A leviathan of polyorganic steel compounds and the most cutting-edge tech in existence, a slender, sleek tube with spherical compartments attached at various points along its hull, each of which was a massive dedicated science lab unto itself. The fold core drive allowed for a vessel of unprecedented size relative to its fuel capacity, and in this case the sheer bulk of scientific equipment. There were multiple full-scale observatories on this ship, each of them synchronized to make use of overlapping sensory fields. And Tobler's men still found ways to fit extra guns on board against the protests of the eggheads who tried and failed to get the commander to stop them. Never hurts to have a backup plan, Tobler would say. "Are you certain, Doctor?" Every eye in the room steeled. Tobler would never refer to one of the scientists as doctor unless he was dead serious. "I'll patch you to the intercom. We all need this." After a handful of seconds, the intercom buzzed to life. "Can I be? No, that isn't pleasant. Yes, I can hear myself, so I imagine you can hear me as well. Attention crew of the Goovy Breaking Dawn. This is Head Science Direct." "Skip the formalities, please," Tobler interjected. "Oh, fine, we found it. We have identified a remarkable world in the nearest star system, the third body. It appears to contain incredible amounts of water, with preliminary scans placing the probability of survivable atmospherics at over 95%, although we would need to get closer to." The intercom was cut off, presumably by the commander, whose voice instead echoed through the vessel's halls. You heard him, boys and girls, and everyone else. "We have a remarkable world. Why don't we humor him and get us some much-needed impromptu shore leave after we get those closer scans?" "Not that I expect the clubbing to be any good out in this backwater," Tobler joked. The resounding cheer from the crew could be heard all over the ship. Even some of the scientists joined in. It took the Breaking Dawn all of an hour to divert from its original course. The fact that it could still use its scanning equipment even while inside a space-time shockwave was something even Tobler was, and still is, astonished by. Not that he really understood the how or why, but he figured if you could see straight in the middle of an explosion, that was pretty damn impressive. And this full core was described as pretty much a miniature Big Bang. So yeah, damn impressive. What wasn't impressive was the collective gasp of despair and breaths of disappointment when the ship dropped off the shockwave at a static orbit not far from the world's upper atmosphere. The whole planet was just barely in full view. Except it wasn't a pristine garden world like the crew had hoped. It had water, lots of it, too much, actually all of it frozen. So white it looked like a giant planet-sized snowball. Even if the atmosphere was survivable, there was nothing pleasant to experience on an ice shelf. "Doctor, I thought you said this world had water, not ice," the commander intoned with strong annoyance. "With all due respect, Commander, from multiple light years away, it simply is not possible to determine with absolute certainty the matter's state of." "Enough, Doctor, just do your scans. When you're done, let us know, and we'll move on," Tobler ordered, slumping back into his command chair while the rest of the bridge crew despondently returned to their mundane tasks. Many of them got up to take breaks now that the ship was no longer in motion. A few hours later, the commander considered the snowball before him, wondering if there was any walkable land on it. No, he thought to himself, any planet that ends up gathering too thick an atmosphere or too much water like this one probably has nothing underneath that ice but sterile fluid. If there was, the planet would have to be classified as a command. The doctor's voice blared over the intercom, still on open transmission. "Dr. Gerard, before you say whatever you're about to say, you should know you are still on open transmit," the commander warned. "That's all right, Commander. I believe everyone should hear this. That planet has life." A pregnant silence fell over the ship. Nothing could be heard but the subtle creak of the ship's interstructural plates as they flexed from the warmth of the nearby solar body, Stably, of course, the fibrous flora that does not bend will surely break, after all. Doctor, I don't know how much difference a few resilient microbes will know. Oh, Commander, not just microbes, Dr. Gerard sharply retorted. Primitive animals, then the commander shot back. Sapients. That world, that death world harbors sapient life, the scientist stated firmly. Solid, liquid, or gaseous, the commander jokingly asked in a combination of poking jest and a request for certainty. What? Oh, never mind. This is no theory, Commander. We've detected signs of unnatural heat sources that cannot be attributed to volcanism, electromagnetic readings from concentrations of metal that quite simply do not occur in nature. Especially not in a world with this much water to rust and negate common magnetic materials. Although there is a vapor cover from a superstorm currently occluding it, this vessel's sensors are capable of filtering out the naturally occurring static strikes. There isn't just a primitive village down there, it's a city, the doctor calmly explained. A city made of metal? With all due respect, Doctor, I find it hard to believe that anything could survive on that planet. Let alone in the middle of a storm the size of a small moon. Speaking of which, have you seen the one orbiting this world? It's damn near the size of the planet itself. I may not be a scientist, but it doesn't take one to understand the implications of tidal forces. There is no way intelligent life could have evolved on that planet. Not even Class 13 death worlds are this lethal, and some of them have atmospheres made of poison. The commander argued, simply unable to believe the doctor's claims. You are correct on one thing, Commander. This is no Class 13 death world. In fact, given the readings I've recovered and the new ones still coming in, the only classification I could give it is 14 Doctor. Gerard's tone was nothing short of incredulous, as if he was reading an inflammatory article aloud. Some of the crew could not hold back audible gasps, even as they looked at each other, confused. Doctor, it seems we have some people aboard who need to retake this mission's qualification exams. Could you enlighten us as to the implications of what you just goddamn said? Tobler commanded with a voice so laced with barely contained fury it made the crew sitting near his chair sweat. The doctor was silent for a moment, realizing that he had roped himself into giving a brief extraplanetological lecture. Well, as I am sure most of you know, Deathworld is the term used to classify life-bearing worlds with extreme conditions. Life-bearing specifically because there is no end to the horrifying dangers that our universe can produce, but for most of these dangers, life is impossible. Death worlds are special because they harbor life despite these horrors, from extreme gravity to toxic atmospheres, unpredictable and deadly weather, or even non-intelligent life hyper-evolved to such degrees that render them some of the most dangerous life forms in existence. The number by which a death world is classified refers to the number of these conditions present. If a condition is significant or dangerous enough to pose an existential risk to the evolution of sapient life, that is added to a given death world's number. High gravity is by far the most common, with most Class 1 death worlds being little more than a particularly large and/or dense terrestrial world. So, Dr. Tobler sardonically asked, please enlighten us, what are the 14 existential threats on this snowball? Despite the antagonization, Gerard did as instructed. First off, it is indeed large and dense enough to support a dangerously high gravity. Most sapient life forms would find the world lethal to stand upon without protective equipment to support their frames, and even then, they would need to take pulse-boosting supplements to ensure their hearts do not give out under the pressure. The suits will also need to be double pressure layered to ensure that the wearer's internal organs do not implode. Some of the crew gagged from the very thought. Yorn shivered. Next is the atmosphere. Although estimates placed it at 95%, likely to be survivable. The vapor cover occluded the lethally high concentrations of pure oxygen. Special filters will be needed to prevent hypoxia. The atmosphere also contains two other lethal conditions. The next is also lethally high concentrations of CO1, 2, and 3, two of which are far more than high enough to be considered ironclad signs of primitive industrialization, which makes the likelihood of its current state being natural unlikely. The commander was shocked. Even his often stoic expression broke at this. You mean to say they made this world Class 14? Doctor, why the hell would they do that? I do not know. Commander Gerard responded. Nevertheless, may I go on? The commander loosed a long, drawn-out sigh. It was unfortunately important for the crew to know the dangers of the world they were faced with. A discovery like this required extensive exploration, including surface teams. Everyone had to be precisely aware of the dangers, but perhaps it was best not to broadcast them over an open intercom. Besides, the doctor said that reports were still coming in. Maybe he was exaggerating. No, doctor, you may not, Tobler replied, his tone flat. Continue scanning and call me down when you're done, and have absolute certainty. That way I can compile a report with the relevant details for the crew to read. It's time we do what we came here for, Tobler ordered. The rest of those at their stations aboard the bridge could be heard in various states of relief. No one was looking forward to Gerard's excited descriptions of hell itself. 1 Union Standard Week pass specified now, because this Class 14 Deathworld's timetable was significantly faster than normal. From the looks of it, about 4 times faster, though there was no telling what sense of time sapience on such a hellhole would even have. Commander Tobler was in his quarters when a knock came at the door. Come in, he invited. One of the ship's few privates stepped in, private and main, barely 20 years old Union Standard. By the standards of whatever people lived on that snowball, he'd be 80. Commander Tobler shuddered to think that this young, naive soul might be considered a grizzled veteran by anyone's standards. He offered a salute and spoke in a well-drilled tone. Sir. Private Main reporting, sir. Ah, Tobler replied. Private Main, at ease. What do you have for me, sir? Head Science Director Gerard has requested your presence, sir, he answered. Finally, Tobler knew he'd told the doctor to gain absolute certainty, but he was beginning to wonder if the good doctor had finally met his match. Seems there was nothing to worry about, or perhaps there is, Tobler mused. In any case, the commander was about to find out. Tobler stood, not bothering to change out of informal attire, and commanded the young soul, lead the way, private. The trip to the 3rd Observatory section didn't take long. The breaking dawn was state-of-the-art and exceptionally well laid out, very much unlike the labyrinthine corridors of the older military vessels that commanders like Tobler had spent years on. Despite this, Tobler was very happy to have this vessel. It was nice to have nice things, even if they weren't traditional. Easy to traverse circular hallways rounded the edges of the ship with access doors for each section at each of the 8 standard planar points, far superior to the ugly, bulky square pathways and far more space efficient. The shape also allowed the ship to go into a sort of low-power mode by turning off the artificial gravity and replacing it with a Coriolis force via spinning. It was a bit awkward since the force decreased near the central chambers, and also that felt gravity reversed, making the floor the ceiling, but it let the ship conserve incredible amounts of power in emergencies. The pair arrived after barely a scant few minutes at the 3rd Observatory. Dr. Gerard was already there, waiting for them. Ah, Commander Tobler, thank you for accepting my request. After the initial reports, I've gotten less than stellar welcomes from the rest of the crew. My very brief analysis has caused stress among them, the doctor intoned, his voice cold and calculated. Damn straight, doctor. What you described would be enough to traumatize children, but all the same, I take it this means you have even more bone-chilling news for me, the commander inquired. Yes, and no more news, though whether or not it is bone-chilling is up to you. As you know, I am unfamiliar with such concepts, Dr. Gerard explained. Yes, I am aware of Androshan's complete and utter lack of a fear response. Perks of evolving on a paradise planet, I suppose, Tobler mused. Curse, more like it. Take my people away from our perfectly safe home, and suddenly the inability to recognize danger becomes a very distinct disadvantage. I had to pass extensive tests to prove my cognitive ability sufficient to supplement my lack in this area, cognitive understanding of danger to replace instinctual fear. Even so, I am restricted by protocol from straying too far from my quarters. Even meeting you at the door here is a risk. Gerard, still all too coldly, elaborated. So you do live in the lab? Damn, there goes 10 creds, Tobler complained, shocked. The head science director offered a look of confusion. Sir. Sorry, doctor, I suppose I should have known better than to bet on common sense. Anyways, let's head inside before anyone in the crew gets too curious. "Private, good work back to your station," Tobler ordered. "Aye, Sir Private," Maine responded before turning and heading back down the hall. The doctor and the commander ventured down the steps, an identical set of which existed inverted on the ceiling of the corridor, just in case that aforementioned emergency measure was ever used. They entered the deeper portions of this section of the ship, the access stations for the external sensory devices in the third observatory. These included not just the new long-distance photon scanners, but also an array of graviton detection equipment, electromagnetic field emitters and transceivers, and a whole bunch of other devices Commander Tobler did not recognize. The eggheads sure did have a lot of fancy toys, and there were 4 sets of these on the Dawn, so they could double-check, cross-reference, and coordinate their data to create more advanced datasets state-of-the-art indeed. According to the schematics and the training procedures, the observatory section specifically could independently separate and remain operational for up to 2 Union Standard years, long enough for this incredibly fast ship to deposit each of them at vastly distant locations to further amplify the effectiveness of their overlapping sensory fields for long-term observation. Although that particular function wouldn't see much use on this mission, it was designed for the scanning of entire galaxies, not individual star systems. Damn that lucky bastard, Kaku Tobler thought. I knew I shouldn't have had that last drink before the day of the competition, so, "Doctor, report what exactly are we looking at?" The commander spoke, bidding the genius andros before him to speak. "Yes, very well. As I stated at the initial briefing, the first 4 existential threats are the high gravity and no less than 3 different lethal atmospheric conditions, 2 toxic, 1 due to air pressure, the latter of which I was not able to elaborate upon." The doctor began, eyeing the commander for permission to elaborate. The commander reassured him, "You're safe here, Gerard. The crew report will only include the essentials. You can be as verbose as you feel you need to. I can take it." Gerard continued excitedly, "Thank you, Commander." The air pressure, although not as high as that of the second planet in the system which, while deadly, certainly does not harbor life, and thus does not classify as a death world, is still astronomical. Equivalent to being over 100 mers deep in the oceans of more typical planets. Even without the force of gravity, the pressure alone would be enough to cause most typical life forms to suffer severe damage to fragile sensory organs and likely circulatory or respiratory failure. In other words, if one were to drop from a relatively safe portion of the atmosphere with nothing more than an air filter and some thermal wear, they would die long before hitting the ground without the aforementioned equipment, before even making the jump. Suffice it to say that for any form of ground-based expedition, the crew will need state-of-the-art suits, which can, thankfully, be synthesized with the ship's fabricators. Rather obviously, the 5th condition is the incredibly low ambient air temperature, well below the freezing point of water in nearly all places on the planet, except only a handful of warm spots near the equator, if indeed such temperatures could even be called warm. Wind speeds in most areas are also rather high, which, in combination with the general temperature, results in sharpened crystallized precipitation capable of maiming or fatally injuring those without proper protection. Even without the wind, the temperatures are low enough to result in larger solidified crystals, which under the force of the world's high gravity, result in similarly lethal hail. The wind patterns themselves are chaotic and close to unpredictable in the long term, but more importantly, frequently result in large-scale storms such as the one currently visible from orbit. Needless to say, all of the previous conditions are intensified during these storms and are joined by frequent naturally occurring static discharges on the order of 300 million volts, enough to vaporize you before you could even know you were struck. And together, all of this makes the 6th condition. The suits will also need conductive layers to redirect such strikes, but it is unlikely that such measures could survive more than a handful, and just one of these storms produces thousands over its lifetime. Granted, thousands of strikes spread out over an incredibly large area. The commander interrupted. "Large area, Doctor? That storm covers nearly half the goddamn planet." Gerard made a poor attempt at hiding his annoyance with the commander's interruption, but said nothing about it, instead preferring to continue. The 7th condition is the radiation, which I've confirmed is not a temporary residual of nuclear warfare. though it does mean that this world's current conditions are, in fact, naturally occurring. This radiation appears predominantly at the poles and spreads throughout the rest of the atmosphere. Though the size of the storm seems to fluctuate on an incredibly long timescale, currently they encompass nearly half the planet. A quarter up and down from each pole, but my reading suggests that during warmer periods, and yes, this planet does have warmer periods, they can shrink to be visible from only very near polar regions. In any case, most forms of life do not even need to see these formations to suffer radiation burns. The eighth condition is the sapients themselves. In standard fashion, sapients tough enough to evolve on a death world of any class are often very dangerous and powerful compared to typical species and are themselves an existential threat, both to other sapients and to themselves. It is rare for societies of them to survive very long. The ninth condition is drawn from clear observations of thousands of impact sites on the planet's abnormally large moon, which is another of the conditions I will get to later, as well as on the surface of the world itself. Statistically, it receives an extinction scale impact every so often. The 10th condition was suspected due to the large satellite, but confirmed recently via a seismic probe. There are frequent, powerful, and violent tectonic instabilities that result in lethal earthquakes and severe amounts of volcanism, which also likely result in extinction-level events every so often and could be the source of the world's current atmospheric conditions. And of course, seismic floods, which are often mistaken for tidal waves. The commander held up one of his 4 hands to silence the doctor briefly as he found a seat. He hadn't thought he'd need one, but this world was terrifying beyond measure, and he needed a way to rest his head in his hands as he considered how the hell he was going to write a report that didn't give his crew nightmares and scared the life out of anyone he had to send down there for the expedition. Perhaps he wouldn't. Today was the last day before the report. Maybe they could request support for this one. Once the commander took a seat, the doctor continued nonchalantly, as if he wasn't listing some of the most dangerous conditions in the galaxy, knowing full well that people were going to be sent down there. The 11th condition also comes from the seismic probe, which simultaneously took a core sample. That one sample alone identified no less than 30 different pathogens. The commander shot up. Pathogens? Please tell me yes. Gerard answered immediately, allowing the commander to return to his seat. All necessary quarantine protocols are in place. The probe sent its data remotely and is currently in a safe microorbit around the vessel. None of the microbes have come aboard, nor will they. In any case, although the probe identified 30, it is highly likely. Given the world's size and shocking variety of biomes despite the temperature, that hundreds or even thousands of pathogenic species exist. This, in combination with its poisonous atmosphere, makes it almost certainly the single most toxic planet in recorded history. Nothing lives down there that hasn't been living there for millions of years. Speaking of which, condition number 12 is expected beneath the ice, and in some areas above it. Exists a wide variety of hyper-evolved species that have survived the world's myriad dangers and repeated extinction events, resulting in monstrous animals as are more dangerous than most military weapons' strength, speed, stamina, toxins, poisons, natural weapons, you name it. It exists down there somewhere. Even the plants have, in many cases, developed lethal defense mechanisms, especially in one of the cold, but relatively unique southern continents. Plants, Tobler interjected. There are plants in that hellhole? Yes. Gerard replied, quite hardy ones at that, most of which bloom only once every solar cycle. Scans also indicate Leviathan-class life forms in the deepest portions of the ocean, though it is unlikely that they ever leave their abyssal habitats. Nevertheless, it also means that deep ocean scanning is dangerous beyond measure, and will likely never be conducted. Gods above, the commander prayed. The head science director ignored him and continued, the 13th condition is the abnormally large satellite. Though we cannot discern how it came about, as it is far too large to be a capture, the sheer size of this moon is enough to generate severe tidal forces. The unstable tectonics are, of course, one of the results, as are the chaotic wind patterns further instigated by its orbit, and severe floods that often accompany the superstorms. The 13th condition, in technicality, however, is the penultimate cause of the current ice age. Do you recall when I said warmer periods? Yes, doctor, I do, Tobler intoned, at this point resigned to the doctor's hellish descriptions. Well, I began with several theories as to how this snowy planet emerged, including nuclear annihilation, volcanic activity, pollution, and even asteroid impact. Ultimately, all of these are dubious. I considered that perhaps a combination of them was the ultimate cause and began to investigate the precise volcanic triggers when I discovered it. As it turns out, the tidal forces generated by the abnormally large satellite, in combination with the world's abnormally fast rotation for a life-bearing planet, also result in subtle but significant disruptions to the world's magnetic field. These disruptions are in part responsible for the radiation anomalies at the poles, but more significantly, build up over very long periods. Eventually, this results in a global magnetic pole reversal essentially. The north and south poles will suddenly snap and exchange places. This sudden shift causes every magnetic substance on the planet to spontaneously reverse polarity. And the vast majority of the world's core is solid magnetic material. This causes an extreme disruption in the convectional currents of its molten mantle, and thus worldwide volcanic events. This pumps frankly mind-boggling amounts of particulate into the atmosphere and results in a rampant greenhouse effect. The commander looked up, confused. Greenhouse effect? I may be no scientist, but even I know that means warmer, doctor, not colder. Head Science Director Gerard sighed for once. Yes, warmer, at first. But as the temperatures climb, the oceans evaporate and the glaciers shrink, resulting in abnormally high amounts of atmospheric water. The polar water adheres onto the atmospheric particulates and generates inconceivable amounts of cloud cover. Said cover then causes a sharp and dramatic decline in temperature, which then causes the polar ice caps to grow at a breakneck pace, which then causes light to reflect off the ice caps and further push away heat from the world, resulting in a chain reaction. As the clouds recede, the glaciers replace them until the entire world is frozen over. In the meantime, superstorms like the one you see right now form out of the global cloud cover and level anything and everything on the surface. Meanwhile, toxic atmospheric chemicals get pulled into the oceans by the precipitation, and at least in theory, suffocate any life down there, though this world's aquatic ecologies have somehow found a way to survive this. Nevertheless, it is a regularly scheduled extinction-level event to join the other two. It happens once every few 100,000 of its solar cycles every 100,000 or so Union Standard years, in other words. Well short enough for recurrence to, in theory, prevent the evolution of sapient life in general, let alone give them enough time to develop space-age technology to escape the disaster. Coupled with the impacts, volcanism, and highly dangerous wildlife, it is a wonder how these sapients ever came to be. Commander Tobler sighed and stood back up. He began to pace around the lab, stopping just before the viewport. He once again found himself considering the hellish snowball before him and the gargantuan storm tearing across its surface. Amazed by the notion that anything could live down there at all, let alone build a city capable of weathering such a thing, he thought. They probably never even saw it coming. As the doctor said, it would get warmer at first before the snap. To them, it probably seemed like a subtle warming. Even if they had thought it was caused by their technological development, he doubted they would stop advancing because of it. Hit by surprise, and yet they persisted. But even so, one question remained. And condition 14, doctor? From the sounds of it, this Deathworld is like every other one in the galaxy put together in a bag and shaken like my favorite drink. It even has this unique satellite. What else could there possibly be? Tobler asked, steeling himself for the final nightmare that Gerard had for him. Well, this one will likely be somewhat contentious, but given that we are the first to truly explore the Kepler void, I think our expertise on the matter will solidify it without too much academic issue. That is to say, I believe the Kepler void itself to be condition 14. It was already known that the stars within the void are the most unstable in the galaxy, for reasons that are still unknown. What is certain, however, is that every star in this region suffers from frequent and violent solar weather that often shoots literally astronomical jets of charged particles at its orbital bodies, bathing them in highly radioactive matter and energy. For most worlds, This alone makes life impossible. But this world's extraordinarily strong magnetic field is not dissimilar from the one employed by the breaking dawn whenever we hunker down to weather one of these solar storms. Even so, it is not nearly as advanced and covers an incredibly large area. Furthermore, due to its proximity, the long-term buildup of radiation is severe. It is likely that this radiation results in a dramatically higher mutation rate in even small microbial life forms, let alone the cells of macroorganisms. For such macroorganisms, this means that their genes degrade at a frighteningly fast pace. It is unlikely that anything on that world is capable of living longer than a handful of Union Standard decades. Simpler life forms may prove more resilient, possibly immortal for certain definitions. But complex, and especially terrestrial animals certainly suffer from pitifully short lifespans, though for most of them it is unlikely that they would die of, well, for lack of a better term, age, than to one of the other myriad dangers. For the sapiens, however, who likely found ways to dissuade such dangers with technology, rapid radiation-induced aging, cancer, and genetic defects built up over generations of mutation must plague them incessantly. Even I cannot imagine how a society where no one lives beyond the age of 25, if they can even retain higher functions past 17, could operate at levels more advanced than simplistic tribal hierarchies. The doctor took a very long breath. This concludes my report. Commander 100, Dr. Tobler corrected him. Gerard asked, confused, lives beyond 100. Their planet rotates 4 times faster than High Union. To them, they never live past 100. They probably start breaking down at 68? Sooner even. These people, they live faster than we do, 4 times faster. Maybe that's how they survived. Their lives are too short to care about long-term consequences, so they focus on living in the now. They focus on supporting the next generation. Gods, I cannot imagine how fast they have to reproduce just to avoid extinction if they ever get off that planet, Tobler explained. Unlikely. Chances are, by the end of this ice age, the classification will be reduced to 13 due to the extinction of the local sapient population. I doubt it, Gerard retorted, but was interrupted. They're alive, Doctor. They've survived to this point. If they were going to go extinct, they would have done so by now. If they could survive long enough to build metal cities amidst fatal toxins, lethal monsters, and cataclysmic weather. I see no reason why they couldn't weather this. What's the usual estimate for that kind of technology? 200,000 years Union Standard. Even with accelerated lifespans, they could only learn so quickly. If anything, that might slow them down. To have metal cities, they'd have to have survived 200,000 years at least. You said that Ice Age happens once every 100,000 or so, which means the fact that they are here, the commander trailed off, lost in thought, considering the resilience and determination of the beings on that snowball. Despite the overwhelming odds, they had found a way to persist, to build, and to live in a place where nothing should thrive. The mission had just taken a turn, and Tobler knew it. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.